How's it going, film and TV fans? Welcome back to yet another off-the-cuff film review here on the Zodiac Enterprises YouTube channel. Today we're back in the world of Batman, continuing our Batman review series with, of course, Batman Returns, released in 1992, and, of course, the final installment in the franchise to be directed by Tim Burton. I have a lot to say about this one. I'm going to just swing for it here. I fucking love this movie. I think it's the best Tim Burton Batman movie. I think it's certainly one of the best Batman movies. It's one of my favourite comic book movies. I love everything about this film. I do think this is, I don't know if it's a controversial take, but I do think this is a much better film than Tim Burton's Batman, Batman 1989. I think this is very evidently a Tim Burton film. I think it's very widely known that I think the quote is only 50% of Batman 89 was actually Tim Burton, whereas here he got complete control to do what he wanted, and obviously it went various different ways, and obviously it's very wildly known that the studio were not particularly happy with some of the content of the film, and particularly how it would play towards a younger demographic, which, by the way, the movie is clearly not intended for in any capacity. I do believe it's one of the only Batman movies rated 15, as far as I'm aware. I will have to, at least in the United Kingdom, have to double check that. But like, it's clearly not in any capacity made for children. But obviously, it's very famously documented that around the time the film came out, like places like McDonald's had to withdraw the merchandise because of how graphic in some way that some elements of the film were, and that's what led to Burton being pulled away from directing the next installment, and Joel Schumacher being brought on board, and that's how Batman Forever exists. But I think the story this one tells is miles better than Batman 99. I think the characters are so much, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I said when we're talking about Batman 99, that the characters are well built there, but they're just on another level here. I don't think if you put the two villains here together that they're entirely, I think the fact that you needed both Penguin and Catwoman here, I think they're both really fantastic. I personally think the better developed character here, the better the villain here, is Catwoman, because there's so much more motivation and there's so much more to actually see, whereas the Penguin is just a small, disgusting looking, kind of grotesque person, and that's the only really character trait he has throughout the entire film. And that the world has rejected him because he looks the way he does, and I think that it's a great B story. I wish Catwoman was the main villain here. Unfortunately, I think the Penguin is still front and centre, which is a real shame, because I think, again, Catwoman here, Michelle Pfeiffer's performance is incredible. It's such a strong character, it's such a strong performance. She really does bring something so amazing to a character like this, and obviously it is well documented that there is a certain horniness to some parts of Catwoman's character, and even some interactions that Catwoman's character has with the Penguin and Batman. But I think that's all part of the almost the tragedy of the story of Catwoman in this movie. And again, I also think the Catwoman's suit in this film was fantastic as well. Again, the costume design is another thing where here it's so much higher than it was in Batman 89. I think Joker's costume in Batman 89 and even Batman's costume and other characters' costumes are fine in that film, but here it's kind of, and that's because, like, it's very well documented that Tim Burton brought a lot of his people that he wasn't allowed to bring on Batman 89, but his previous collaborators that he worked on before, like, for instance, people who had worked on Beetlejuice. A lot of the crew who worked on Batman Returns had worked on Beetlejuice with Tim Burton, so it's very, very great to see it being a Tim Burton movie and having Tim Burton's crew, people he prefers to work with here, on board, bringing their A game here, that unfortunately they weren't allowed to be on Batman 89 because of studio stuff. So like, it just feels so much more on brand here. I just think the story it tells, the production design is also just a million times better. Again, the world that Batman 89 builds with Gotham is just so much more fantastically constructed here. It's like, it's another level here that it's built upon. I think the production design for the Penguin's underground lair is just incredible. I think some of the rooftops that Batman and the Catwoman are on also like look fantastic from a visual perspective. The duck the Penguin appears on, that's a really cool thing. It's just so the world is so brilliantly expanded upon here, and it really reaches its peak. I think we see a very different version of Gotham, of this world, in Forever and Batman and Robin, and anything going forward. And again, this is the peak of that kind of world that I just adore the whole synchronicity of it between this and Batman 1989, and obviously this could be a standalone movie, not even connected to that one, because there were very sparse references to that movie. There's Vicky Vale was mentioned once. I don't think anything that happened in that movie is even directly addressed, as far as I'm aware, in this film. The only really thing connecting this movie to the last one is Michael Keaton as Batman, Michael Gough as Alfred, and Pat Hingle as Commissioner Gordon. Those are the only real things that come over from the previous film. If there are any others like in the film's world, please let me know in the comments. But as far as I'm aware, those are the only things that really bring the two worlds together. I just think as a whole, the project, the film, is just like something so... It really fills Batman's world up with so much new and bold and fresh, I think, while also still having a lot of what... Like, it's very clear Tim Burton was free to make his movie, and I think Batman 89 could have been so much better if he was just let to be himself. And I love... I think the best example of this is that Danny Elfman's score here is just, like, incredible. It's such a beautiful score. It's one of the best Batman scores out there. Like, don't get me wrong, the score for Batman 1989 is fantastic as well, but I think even he has said that it was kind of overshadowed by the Prince songs, whereas here it's just him and the music, and it really shines. It is documented that actually Burton and Elfman had a falling out during the production of this film, but they reconciled not long afterwards. But I just think the music here and the symphonic world that is created here alongside the visual world, those two things, they mesh so perfectly here. And I just love the fact that this is a Christmas movie as well. Like, I watch this movie every year at Christmas. I think it's a real peak of the character for Batman, I think. And I think it's definitely one that is certainly and mysteriously overlooked and maybe even underrated. I think people are aware of its existence, but it's never talked about as much as its predecessor. And it's never talked about as much as they are definitely it's slightly worse movies. It's never talked as much about as Forever or Batman and Robin, but those are talked about more because they're bad, whereas this is just so on another level. But it's kind of just that ugly middle child that's never really addressed. Oh, it's there, it exists, you know, Batman Returns is a film, but because it's so much different to anything either side of it, people just don't want to realistically not acknowledge it exists, but they just forget about it. And I think it's a shame, because again, it's a real testament to Burton and his creativity and certainly his style of filmmaking, that it really not only does it feel like a Tim Burton movie, it feels like a Batman movie. And I think those are the most important things any filmmaker can do when they're adapting an IP or a character that is pre-established in a pre-established world. It has to feel like the filmmaker's interpretation, but it still has to feel like the IP that they're, you know, adapting. And there are a lot of examples of either one of those things not working, but this is an example of the two of them actually coming together and working so perfectly that this feels like a Batman movie, and it feels like a fucking Tim Burton movie. And I think that is the most apt description I can give for the film. I recommend anyone who is listening or watching this review to just go and check it out again, because it is certainly probably the most underrated Batman movie, and I absolutely adore like every second of it. I can't speak highly of this movie enough. I think it's certainly a super special film. And you know, it makes me sad that we didn't get to see what he was going to do next with Batman in his proposed third movie. But if this is where things had to end for Tim Burton, I'm glad we ended on such a high note. Not that Batman 89 is a bad film in any capacity, it's really good, but I just think the world, the continuation of that, and the expansion of it in this film. And again, there is so much. The performances here as well. Keaton is still my favourite Batman, and I think he's allowed to do so much more with the character here. Yeah, it still feels like he's doing amongst the same stuff, but like more of it, and I think he gets a chance to do so much more with Bruce Wayne here than I think he did in the last film, because there's maybe a bit more Bruce Wayne than Batman here, and obviously it's very well known that he didn't want Batman to say much, so most of the dialogue comes as when he is as Bruce Wayne, not Batman. Another thing I'd like to talk about as well is Christopher Walken as Max Schreck. I know he's an original character, but I think it's a really fantastic character. I have said previously, I'm not a huge fan of the Penguin. I don't hate the Penguin plot. I think it's fantastic. I enjoy it, but I think it takes away so much from Selina Kyle and the Catwoman story that it kind of just, like, you could have balanced it a bit more. I think there's too much Penguin and not enough Catwoman here. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of Catwoman too, and there's a lot of solo stuff, and I think what really shines through is those sequences where it's Catwoman on her own, talking to herself in her apartment, and it really shows how fantastic of a performer Michelle Pfeiffer is to be able to pull off, like, almost two completely different characters. With the Selina Kyle we see before she gets pushed out the window by Max Schreck as an awkward kind of nerdy kind of loner to the very kind of strong, sophisticated, I know what I want to do, I know I can do it kind of character that we see when she becomes Catwoman. And a much more spiritually free person in Catwoman as well. And I think it takes an incredibly talented performer to bring these two characters, these two different versions of the same character. And I just think, out of all the performances in the movie, it is Michelle Pfeiffer's performance as Catwoman that I think is absolutely the best performance. Everyone else, again, is fantastic. Danny DeVito as Penguin is certainly an interesting choice. It's really hard, having not watched 17 full seasons of Always Sunny, to not hear Frank, despite the fact the character of Frank didn't even exist at this point in time. But it's really hard to not hear Frank come out every once in a while in The Penguin. But I think there is so much to love about The Penguin, and I think the tragedy of it, DeVito plays it, I think, in a certain cunning way, where he's able to fool a lot of the townspeople with the somberness, but deep down he's just a really weird character, but he's still able to like fool them into, oh, my parents, or like, I like that. I think there's definitely two sides to the Penguin. I'm glad that those two sides were not explored as much as perhaps we could have seen them explored, but I do think overall these villains here are certainly better than what we're going to get, at least in the next two installments. And as someone who, like, I remember having this and Batman Forever on VHS. I never watched this one. I don't know why. It just didn't like grasp me. Or if I did, I don't remember. But I do remember watching Batman Forever very vividly. And it was the two posters that made me be like, oh, because on the cover of Batman Forever it's Batman, Robin, Two-Face and the Riddler. And then on the cover of Batman Returns it's Batman, Catwoman and the Penguin. So these two kind of very tonally opposite films, and I just never gravitated to this one, which is a shame because, again, I adore this movie. I think it's definitely top 3 Batman. I think once I finish this series, it's definitely actually a contender for the best Batman movie for me. Again, like I said, I think Michael Keaton's my favourite Batman, and this is definitely the movie that proves that point to me. So it's definitely a contender for best Batman movie, but I think it's going to have obviously seriously strong competition with Batman. No, seriously strong competition with Dark Knight, and definitely The Batman. Who knows? We'll see when we come to the end of this journey. I might do a Batman ranked video. That could be a fun thing to do as well. In fact, I probably will do that. But it remains to be said that I do think Batman Returns is a certain height for Batman media portrayals, at least in film. But I don't think we're going to see again, at least from 1992, at least until The Dark Knight. I love Batman Begins, but I think it's certainly got its issues, which we'll get into rather controversially at that time. But it's certainly a peak for the character, and it's certainly a peak that I enjoy very much. So thank you so much for watching or listening, because again, we're back in podcast form. Do check that out. I hope you have enjoyed this review. Join us next time where we take a look at the first animated film in this series, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which we'll be talking about in the next video. I do hope you've enjoyed this review, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye for now.